Hello friends, it's the Ikonique workshop again. I'm Alexei Dovner. It's the diary of an icon painter. We are in SUPRASL again after a short break as the borders were closed and we couldn't come. But here we are again and we continue to work on the paintings in this wonderful temple. So friends, we are back in service, again on the scaffolding. But of course the situation in my country of Belarus does not allow us neither to sleep nor work peacefully and to leave the country freely. Therefore, this time we are more closely faced with the problem of strict adherence to the technological cycle of fresco painting. What is fresco? Fresco from start to finish. In the literature on the internet, we can read that fresco is painting on wet plaster. But how does it work? What is it, painting on wet plaster? Any painting is a system. In easel painting on canvas, it's a system of stretcher, canvas, primer, oil paint and varnishes. In the case of icon, this is a system of board, lavkas from chalk and glue of animal origin, egg tempera, oil, and now varnish. How does this system work in the icon? Lavkas is a rather porous material. Egg tempera is applied to it, that being colored pigments, finely ground mineral paints, or oxides. They are mixed with the egg emulsion as a binder, but this binder is intermediate. When the painting is finished and the icon is ready, we saturate the whole painting with linseed oil. Linseed oil penetrates through tempera into the lavkas and seals the entire thick enough layer together with lavkas and paint in one system. This system is complete. In the future, since linseed oil oxidizes over time and darkens from ultraviolet radiation, we cover the icon with varnish. This allows you to keep the colors unchanged, so that they do not fade, so that they do not darken or change. How does the fresco system work? Fresco is also a system that consists of a specially prepared wall, a layer of preliminary lime plaster, of hydrated lime, and 2 layers of intonaco. Intonaco is, I would compare it with lavkas for an icon, because it is a very well prepared lime, sifted, strained. It is smooth, almost like lavkas. Well, the only thing, it does not shine. And while the system is still wet, as long as the intonaco has enough moisture, we can apply paint based on a colored pigment and a solution of calcium hydroxide, which also protrudes from the intonaco and consolidates our fresco. In these containers, we store prepared lime for intonaco. A layer of water is collected on top. This is not just water, it's a saturated solution of calcium hydroxide. On the top of this solution, this hard crust is formed in a few days. This crust is formed as a result of the oxidation of calcium hydroxide. It's insoluble in water, and it seals the paint layer on the surface of the plaster. This is the very substance that laminates our fresco. We have a very tight time frame here. That is, until This covering layer of calcium hydroxide is released from the intonaco, and until it's not oxidized in the air, the wall can absorb paint and consolidates it. As soon as, even on wet plaster, an invisible, very thin layer of calcium hydroxide appears, which has already oxidized and does not dissolve with water, the wall stops absorbing paint and does not allow the paint layer to consolidate. Therefore, there is a problem. If the artist did not have an opportunity to apply the paint layer in time and the wall dried up, then what to do? And sometimes it happens that the wall is still wet. It seems that we can apply paint, but the paint does not hold. Why is this happening? When we act with a brush on this invisible layer of calcium hydroxide that has just begun to form, we are as if destroying it, and we lift the top layer of intonaco upward along with paint. It mixes and pores appear, and a new layer of calcium hydroxide protrudes upward. The longer we paint a fresco, well, constantly at a certain period of time, the longer this system works, and the time frame in which we can paint expands. But it's worth leaving the wall overnight in dry weather. Calcium hydroxide will harden, and we can no longer paint simply with the pigment dissolved in water. Therefore, you have to use some kind of binders. Artists have always finished painting a fresco with paints based on binders, like casein, like egg tempera. But the problem of organic binders is that fungus eats them. Mold, mildew, they deteriorate over time, and the paint crumbles. We can observe that on ancient frescoes that are as if in a haze and seem to have survived, but not 100%. 20% of the paint layer remains. We can see this in the Pherapont monastery, in the frescoes of Dionysius. It seems like the fresco is still there, but only the primary colors remain. It depends very much on the quality of the lime, and the quality of the lime depends on the area where the material for the production of the lime is extracted. For example, in a mountainous area, like in the Mediterranean, this lime will be of very good quality. It will be thick, it will be very hard when it dries. It will have a lot of calcium hydroxide that dissolves in water, and roughly speaking, silicate is obtained that consolidates the paint. In European areas, lime is thinner. It does not seal the paint to itself so well. Therefore, even here, well, this is Europe, we use paints based on binders to finish painting the fresco on a dry wall. Now it so happened that not all of our specialists were able to leave the country on time, as they were busy. Grenades! They are coming. With strollers, right here, near the school. And so it turns out that sometimes not everyone can leave in time, following the schedule that allow the fresco to be started and finished exactly on raw. Therefore, we're finishing the fresco now on the dry wall. The colors were revealed on the wet plaster. Some touches were made on the faces, on the clothes, but not much. We now have to finish on dry. But the whole system still remains fresco on wet plaster. because in the future, calcium hydroxide from moisture from the environment will be released to the surface and cover our fresco with a membrane. This happens for a long time. Years will pass. But every year the lime becomes harder and harder, and our base becomes stronger and stronger. Nothing happens to it. Even if we poured water on it for the whole winter, we had such a case in Montenegro. We painted with the same mix technique, and the roof leaked out, and it rained all winter, and water just poured down the wall. 2 years later, when we came to see how our fresco was doing there, we were very surprised. The fresco didn't even deteriorate. On the contrary, it has become even better. It has solidified even better. The plaster has become harder. I don't know if you noticed, in ancient frescoes, there are always dark areas around the cracks. This is the very membrane that stands out from the cracks and closes it from above, covers the paint from above. The paint darkens slightly. And we found the same effect on our new fresco, which was only 2 years old. It looked like a 15th century fresco. This struck me, and I began to research why is this happening, and now I'm sharing it with you. Therefore, we finish our fresco without any doubt on a dry wall, using silicate as a binder. The fact is that silicate, namely a silicate technology of liquid glass, was invented in 1818 by a German chemist. And in fact, this process is very similar to the chemical process in lime. What we get during the oxidation of lime, precisely a hard layer. We practically get the same when the silicate dries. The processes are absolutely the same. And in fact, this is one system that is indistinguishable from one another in a dry state. There is, of course, some differences in the application of paint. That is, when we paint on dry plaster, the wall soaks the paint very nicely directly from the brush. This does not happen on a dry wall, but there are other factors that are much more convenient. We can control the color change, we can control the density of the paint, which we cannot do in a fresco on wet plaster. When we need to predict how the paint will change when it dries. Sometimes it brightens on the wall and sometimes darkens. And here you have to understand the whole system, how it works, how wet the wall was when we painted during this period, or how dry was it, how much lime is in the paint, is it there, how each pigment changes, how they react with each other. Because in the alkaline reaction, changes also occur in the pigments themselves. Some pigments darken, some change colors. All of this must be perfectly understood and taken into account when applying the paint layer. Therefore, when we finish the fresco already on a dry wall, we do not need to think about it. We don't need to take into account all these subtleties that are always there to trick you, all the time. Even if we think that we know everything about the system, we applied paint on a wet wall in time. We know what pigments we applied, we know how they will change, we know that will happen to them in the future, but anyway some tricks come out that are very difficult to explain. It constantly needs to be analyzed. We have to constantly do some kind of lab research. What we actually do every day. We analyze what we've got and why it happened. How to fix it, how to avoid it, or it's the other way around and it's an effect that we can enjoy. It's very interesting, I love it. It's called reverse engineering. It's an American term. In fact, I do it all the time. Well, I think I've said enough here.
наговорил
I've
достаточно,
said
и
enough
мы
and
можем
we
приступить
can get to
к
work.
работе.